When the story broke that National Security Advisor John Bolton was fired, Trump-hating politicos and media types seized on the departure as more evidence that the doors are coming off the White House.
The most convincing evidence that we've seen of late that we have a governing crisis.
Adversaries have already detected a significant amount of disarray and chaos.
Nobody lasts long in the chaos of the Trump administration.
It certainly projects instability to both allies and adversaries alike.
I don't think we can emphasize enough, and I heard from a senior Democratic foreign policy maven, if you will, the amount of dysfunction in the foreign policy apparatus.
Policy maven, if you will. Well, as usual, the lemmings are totally jumping off the ledge together, okay? Here's what I learned when I was a 22-year-old White House staffer. You know what I learned? That you work at the pleasure of the chief executive, the President of the United States. So if you accept any position in any administration, your job is to pursue the goals of the president, not your own. Your job is to find ways to accomplish his priorities, not your own. Your job is to advocate his worldview, not your own.
The president's entitled to the staff that he wants at any moment. This is a staff person who works directly for the president of the United States, and he should have people that he trusts and values and whose efforts and judgments benefit him in delivering American foreign policy.
That was Pompeo today. Now, I've known John Bolton for decades. He's appeared on this show many times. We obviously really like him and respect him very much. But his position at the White House, let's all be honest, it was always going to be a complicated fit. Now, remember, Bolton, of course, worked for George W. Bush in one position as UN ambassador. And in some areas, he's closer to the interventionist wing of the GOP than he is to Trump's America First view. Now, I still remember when the Democrats used to agree with being a less interventionist power. But then Trump derangement syndrome took hold, and they became walking contradictions of themselves. Here's what Democrats sounded like when Bolton was appointed.
John Bolton didn't even know what he was being hired for,
right,
let alone not knowing that he was being hired. And John Bolton is a dangerous man.
John Bolton, I think, is a disastrous pick.
When it comes to John Bolton, if Congress does not want to go to war, now is the time to start putting restraints on this president.
Here's what they sound like now.
On a couple key issues, this failed idea for a summit at Camp David and these colossal failures with North Korea, Bolton was right.
You need a national security advisor who's willing to give you alternative views.
John Bolton will land on his feet. He also has a knowledge about certain ways of the international affairs, international actions.
That could be my favorite then and now ever, by the way. Now, even liberal Nate Silver saw this for what it was in his tweet, saying, maybe I'm a simpleton, but it seems like if you criticize Bolton's hiring, you probably shouldn't also criticize his firing. Well, media goofballs are now focused on the discrepancy on whether Bolton would quit or whether he was fired. He says the former and released this terse resignation letter dated today to prove it. Trump said he asked for the resignation. Translation, fired him last night. But who cares which it was? It was long overdue. Trump's allegiance isn't to any particular process or to any particular cabinet member, but to the people who elected him and to the country at large. He's a true maverick because he came like a freight train at the old GOP foreign policy establishment that had gotten us bogged down in two costly wars as China grew basically unchallenged. Trump promised to bring our troops home from Afghanistan, and yet the military and national security officials have mostly resisted him every step of the way on that goal. This frustrates the president to no end. He knows that most Americans don't just want our troops back home, but they don't even think the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were worth fighting. But the old Bush team, of course, they won't take no for an answer. Despite Obama's election, then Trump's election, of course, Obama came in 2008, then Trump in 2016, which represented a bipartisan and total repudiation of the Bush doctrine.
We left our troops in Europe for 45 years until Germany could unify between 1945 and 1990. We're still there. We keep the peace on the Korean Peninsula since 1953. And I know that Americans are tired of some of the responsibilities, but frankly, there's nobody but the United States of America that can do these.
Well, we love Condi, but this isn't 1945 or 1953. It's the 21st century. And after 2 wars that began post 9/11, this is where public opinion is. Look at it. 62% say Iraq wasn't worth fighting. 59% say Afghanistan wasn't worth fighting. So, look, contrary to being a sign of chaos, the Bolton news, I think, shows a commitment to principle and efficiency. Anyone who can't produce results and anyone who can't get on board with the president's agenda shouldn't be inside working to oppose him or undermine him. H.R. McMaster was canned after some thought he bumbled as national security advisor. Tillerson was a colossal failure at the State Department. Price was fired, a very nice man, at HHS after making no headway on drug prices. Kirstjen Nielsen was gone when she couldn't manage the border crisis. Sessions was shown the door at DOJ after myriad mistakes, including one that led to the appointment of a special counsel. Gary Cohn quit when he lost the debate on tariffs. And let's not forget Scaramucci. He was out after 10 days as press secretary when it became too much mooch and not enough MAGA. President Trump is really impatient for results, and he's going to change personnel as necessary to achieve them. I'll take that any day over someone who cavalierly coasts on the status quo or doubles down on failure with a swagger. Trump's foreign policy is best described as prudent realism. He believes that given the fact that the U.S. economy now represents about 20 to 25% of the global GDP, we need to maximize our leverage wisely. Trump actually considers how much military missions cost our taxpayers, of course, their hard-earned money, and whether they make our life here better and safer at home. Again, the Bushes, very patriotic people. We honor their service in government, but they didn't spend a lot of time worrying about those details. So, looking back on it, is that approach more moral than Trump's when our citizens here drive on roads and bridges that are falling apart? Most voters think we should fix our schools and our airports before we try to fix Syria's. And right now, Trump has a stellar team in place. Just to name a few: Secretary of State Pompeo, Attorney General Bill Barr, Bob Lighthizer at Trade, never been a trade rep better than he, Steve Mnuchin at Treasury, Alex Azar at HHS, phenomenal, Mark Esper, Acting Secretary of Defense, terrific. They all understand their role is to advance the president's agenda. That's the way it works. Sure, you offer your advice and sometimes you debate. President's fine with that. But then you get on board with whatever he decides. It's not your decision. And if you cannot do that, then step aside for someone who can. Everyone understand? And that's the angle.